It's a cold, dark night, and there is fog creeping all around you as you make your way down the cobblestone streets of Whitechapel, London. The year is 1888, and you have heard the news reports about the killer on the loose in this area. He's sometimes known as the Whitechapel Murderer or the Leather Apron, but usually he's known by a much more menacing name. You know that he's already killed at least 5 women, maybe even more. You also know that despite the police force's best efforts, they still don't have much of an idea who is behind all of these killings. You hurry home down the dimly lit streets, keeping your head down while making eye contact with no one. This is how everyone in Whitechapel behaves now. There is a lot of fear in the air, as nobody knows who to trust, and everyone is scared and on the lookout for the mysterious serial killer known as Jack the Ripper. Subscribe to our channel for the mysteries and stay for the stories. Today we'll be discussing the unsolved mystery of Jack the Ripper, one of the most infamous serial killers in history. We'll find out some details about his gruesome murders, the intriguing letters he may or may not have written to the press, and finally, explore some of the theories into his possible identity. First of all, let's explore a little bit about the background to this mystery. Whitechapel in 1888. Whitechapel is a district in London that at this time was hugely impoverished. Housing conditions were terrible, and most of the people who lived here could barely scrape out a living. Death rates were high, but especially for children, as over half died before they were even 5 years old. The area was also full of criminal activity, including many robberies, as there was very low quality work available, so that people had to do whatever they could to survive. Many women in the area were faced with no other choice but sex work to support themselves and their families. Back in these years, Whitechapel seemed like a prime area for a serial killer like Jack the Ripper to run rampant. And run rampant he did, as this was the place where he killed most of his victims between August and November of 1888. Although Spitalfields, a similarly impoverished area, was also a place where one of Jack the Ripper's murders occurred. It is still disputed just how many victims of Jack the Ripper there really were. At least 5 murders attributed to him, known as the Canonical 5. However, the total number may be even higher than that. All of Jack the Ripper's victims were female, but contrary to popular belief, not all of them were sex workers. This idea was actually invented by the media, because most of Jack the Ripper's victims were killed at night when they were out on the street, and they were killed when they were in a reclining position. According to historian Hallie Rubenhold, the reason why many of Jack the Ripper's victims were out on the street at night is because they were homeless, and the reason why they were killed when they were lying down is because they were sleeping. The Canonical 5 are the 5 unfortunate murdered women that can most easily be linked to Jack the Ripper. They were killed within a short distance of each other and mostly killed in the same gruesome way. The first of the Ripper victims was Mary Ann Nichols, whose mutilated body was discovered on the 31st of August 1888 by a meat cart driver named Charles Allen Cross. More about him later on. Mary Ann's throat had been cut and her body stabbed and slashed. Chillingly, most of the injuries occurred after death. Before her murder, Mary Ann had a difficult life as she was left by her husband and struggled with alcoholism and poverty. She had brief employment as a domestic servant, but also allegedly supported herself through sex work. The next of the Canonical 5 was Annie Chapman. Like Mary Ann before her, Annie also had a difficult life and an even worse death. Her body was discovered only a few short days after the body of Mary Ann Nichols, and had similar gruesome injuries. Her throat had been cut and her body had been slashed. It seemed that a terrible pattern was beginning to form. The third victim of Jack the Ripper was Elizabeth Stride. Elizabeth was a Swedish immigrant who came to England either to work as a servant or because she liked the country so much after visiting relatives that she wanted to stay. Elizabeth's murder was different from the first 2 victims because her body wasn't mutilated. This was because her body was discovered very quickly after her murder by a steward, who likely scared off the murderer when he drove his horse and cart through the area where Elizabeth was murdered. At first, this made investigators believe Jack the Ripper was not linked to this murder, but it was later connected to the serial killer because of the way her throat had been cut, her similarity to the Ripper's other victims, and the fact that the fourth victim, Catherine Eddowes, was murdered soon after, with Catherine living only a short distance away. The fifth and final victim of the canonical five was Mary Jane Kelly. Mary Jane was the youngest of those murdered, at only 25 years old. Her body was arguably the most brutally treated, and she was also murdered in bed, unlike the other victims who were murdered on the street. The murders of these five women are an absolute tragedy, and what makes it even worse is the fact their killer was never caught and is unknown even to this day. The investigation into the identity of Jack the Ripper was extensive, as police interviewed over 2,000 people, investigated over 300, and detained 80. Of those people, a few prime suspects emerged, which we'll discuss later. Things became so serious that a group of volunteers even formed the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee to help police track down the killer, as many thought they weren't doing a good enough job. The group was formed by local businessmen and led by George Lusk, who hired groups of unemployed young men to patrol the area at night, armed with sticks, to protect everyone from Jack the Ripper. Making things even worse was the fact that Jack the Ripper seemed to taunt the police with letters. Thousands were received, but most were clearly hoaxes. Only 3 are likely to have been written by the serial killer's own hand. The first of these letters is the Dear Boss letter, and it's from this letter that Jack the Ripper earned the name. In the letter, Jack the Ripper seemed to make fun of the police for doing such a bad job of tracking him down, talked about how much he loved killing and what he was planning to do next, and also said he was disappointed about having to write in red ink instead of blood like he wanted. It read, "Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I'm down on whores and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Ha ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers just for jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. P.S. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands, curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha. The second piece of communication that may have been from Jack the Ripper was a lot shorter this time, just a postcard now known as the Saucy Jackie postcard. What made this postcard so compelling to investigators was the fact that the handwriting was nearly the same as the Dear Boss letter. However, the information contained in the postcard was all common knowledge by the time it was posted. It reads, "I was not codding dear old boss when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow, double event this time, number 1 squealed a bit, couldn't finish straight off. Had not time to get ears off for police, thanks for keeping last letter back till I got to work again. Jack the Ripper." The third and final letter that potentially came from Jack the Ripper is the From Hell letter. This letter is interesting because it was sent to George Lusk, the man who had started the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. It was also written with many more spelling errors than the 2 previous letters, and in different handwriting. Some experts believe this may have been the killer trying to throw the investigators off his trail. Others believe it is a genuine letter, and the others are fakes. And finally, some believe this one is a fake itself. The letter is very short and taunts George Lusk. Jack the Ripper tells him that he has sent him half a kidney that he has taken from one of his murder victims, and that he's eaten the other half. He also tells George that he will send him the bloody knife used as the murder weapon, if George can be patient. The letter is also sent from hell, meaning that if it is real, Jack the Ripper had a very dark and twisted view of himself. This is the letter. From hell, Mr. Lusk. So, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate, it was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you only wait a while longer. Signed, Catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk. It's important to remember there is no definitive evidence that proves these letters really did come from Jack the Ripper. Many believe they're just part of the endless hoax letters sent by people all over the country. In fact, in 1931, a journalist named Fred Best allegedly confessed that he and another journalist named Tom Bullen had written some of the Ripper letters in order to keep the public interested in the murder cases so that they could sell newspapers. Making it difficult to further analyze the letters is the fact that they, along with many other items and information related to the investigation, have disappeared over the years. Some information was lost during the Blitz. Other information was either taken as souvenirs or simply thrown away when the case seemed to run cold. Some things have been donated back again, but sadly there are still gaps in the evidence that may never be found again. So, now that we know more about the gruesome murders of Jack the Ripper, let's find out a bit more about the people that are suspected to have been him. The investigation into the identity of Jack the Ripper has always been a difficult one. At the time of the murders, most of the public were unhappy with the efforts of the police. They thought the police could have done a better job of trying to track down the Ripper, such as by offering a reward for his capture. Realistically though, the police were doing pretty much all they could for the time period. You have to remember this was in the 1880s, and forensic evidence and modern police tactics didn't exist yet. The police force took photographs of the victims and made crime scene drawings. However, without important tools like DNA evidence, chances are they would not have been able to find Jack the Ripper unless they saw him committing one of his murders, or if he, or someone who knew him, confessed. All of that didn't stop police trying their hardest to solve the case though, and despite never catching the killer, they were able to come up with a pretty compelling list of suspects. And of course, there are countless other wild theories about the identity of this mysterious killer. One of the early suspects was a man named Montague John Druitt. Druitt was a barrister who had become a schoolteacher, but took his own life by drowning in the River Thames. The reason why he was suspected of being the Ripper was because details about his life were reported inaccurately. His age was reported incorrectly, and his profession was reported as a doctor, and many at the time believed Jack the Ripper must have been a doctor or a surgeon because of the way he cut up and dissected his victims so precisely. It was also reported that he committed suicide after murdering Mary Ann Kelly, but this is also untrue. Another suspect at the time was the murderer George Chapman, whose real name was Seweryn Antonowicz Klosowski. This was because he apparently liked to go out for hours at a time at night, and because he targeted women. However, most people don't believe he was actually Jack the Ripper because he killed his victims, 3 of his mistresses, using poison. Then there was Francis Tumblety. Francis was a quack doctor who sold fake medicine, also killing someone by doing so. He was not only suspected of being Jack the Ripper, but also of having something to do with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. He also apparently had a collection of wombs from all sorts of different women, which he proudly showed off to friends. Francis was arrested in England for homosexuality, which was at that time against the law, then fled to France and then the US. Officials say there is no evidence that confirms him as the notorious serial killer. Finally, one of the most well-known Ripper suspects is Aaron Kosminski. Aaron was a Polish immigrant who spent time in an insane asylum suffering from auditory hallucinations and paranoia. He was named as a suspect by Robert Anderson, one of the investigators working on the case at the time. In 2014, forensic evidence claimed to prove that Aaron was the real Jack the Ripper. Investigators used mitochondrial DNA evidence from a shawl supposedly belonging to one of the victims, but most scientists believe that the evidence is too unreliable to prove anything completely. Even after all of these years, the search for Jack the Ripper hasn't ended, despite the murders occurring nearly 150 years ago. Modern researchers have also come up with a long list of subjects, some more believable than others. One of the more believable suspects is Charles Allen Cross, the cart driver who discovered the body of the first Ripper victim, Mary Ann Nichols. Some believe that he was the killer because he may have pretended to find the body to cover up the fact he had been in the process of mutilating it, and because where he lived and worked meant that he was close by other Ripper murders. Then there are the claims about the Ripper's identity that are just too wacky to be true. Some believe that the author of Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, was the killer. Some believe that it was one of the grandsons of Queen Victoria. The creator of Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, believes the killer may have even been a woman, Jill the Ripper. Unfortunately, we may never have a clear answer. All we know is that the crimes of Jack the Ripper were truly terrible, and the streets of Whitechapel and Spitalfields were full of terror during the time he prowled them in the dark, looking for his next victim. What are your theories about Jack the Ripper? Is there any interesting information that we missed? If so, let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more videos just like this one.